Hello, everybody. We're live here from Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, and I want to welcome you to Book Talks, a series of conversations with authors about their books. This series is hosted collectively and collaboratively by Pittsburgh Theological Seminary's Center for Writing and Learning Support and the Barber Library. My name is Shan Overton, and I'm the director of the Center for Writing and Learning Support here at the seminary. And I'm assisted today in my interview with our guest by my colleague, the Reverend Karen Rohrer, director of PTS's Center for Adaptive and Innovative Ministry. And along with Karen, I'd like to, and my colleagues at the Barber Library, Director Michelle Spomer, and User Services Librarian Tisha Wu, I'd like to express how glad we are that you are here on Zoom and to welcome you as we celebrate and discuss the Reverend Dr. Teri McDowell Ott's new book, Necessary Risks, Challenges Privileged People Need to Face, recently published by Fortress Press. Before we launch into our conversation, I'd like to make a few announcements. One, please be aware that we're recording this event. It will be available for viewing on the Book Talks page of the PTS website and on our YouTube channel in the coming weeks. Second, if you'll look in your chat window, you'll see links to the PTS Book Talk page and to Amazon and bookshop.org, where you can purchase the Reverend Ott's book. Next, I'd also like to urge you to explore a resource for readers available through the library. Michelle and Tisha have created this LibGuide especially for Teri's book. You'll find articles that Teri has written, other interviews she's done, as well as a bibliography of additional books and articles that approach a similar topic that we'll be discussing tonight. Thanks so much to Michelle and Tisha for creating these fabulous LibGuides. A few other additional thank yous. Again, I want to thank my colleague Karen Rohrer for joining me to have this conversation with Teri. I thought it would be really important for somebody involved with innovation in ministry to tease out some questions that church pastors and lay leaders and public theologians might be thinking about as we talk. Also, I'd like to thank Holly McKelvey, the Writing Center's administrative assistant, who registered all of you and helped us get the word out about the event. Also, our communications department, especially Melissa Logan and Robin Menard, who are owed a debt of gratitude as they publicize this evening's book talk. We are awfully grateful to them. And thank you especially to Bobby Jarsulik, who is in the background here. He and our entire remarkable IT department do a lot to support our work. And I really appreciate that so much every time I'm on Book Talks, whether it's in person or on the web. Our format today will be the following. I'm going to formally introduce Teri, and then Karen and I will ask her a few opening questions about the book and how it came into being. But we want this to be as unstructured a conversation as possible, and we want you to join, despite this being a webinar. Our interest is in having a rich conversation, so we do want you to participate if possible. To that end, as Teri and Karen and I are talking, please think of questions that you might like to ask and put them in the chat or the Q&A where we can voice them for you and give Teri a chance to engage with you directly that way. Also, we may be asking you some questions and inviting you to put your answers in the chat, so stay alert to that. One more quick note for those of you who are on Zoom, please see a live transcription button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to read along with us as we are having our conversation this evening. And now to formally introduce our guest, the Reverend Dr. Teri Ott. She has been an ordained Presbyterian PCUSA minister for over 20 years. She received a Master of Divinity degree from Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary and then completed her Doctor of Ministry degree from McCormick Theological Seminary. She has served the church in a variety of pastoral positions and began serving Monmouth College as their chaplain in January of 2011. While at Monmouth, Teri was promoted to Dean of the Chapel in 2019. Then on June of last year, 2021, Teri accepted a new call as editor and publisher of the Presbyterian Outlook, which is the only independent publisher of the Presbyterian Church USA. She is married to the Reverend Dr. Daniel J. Ott, who serves as the Dean of Eastern Mennonite University's School of Theology, Humanities, and the Performing Arts. They live in Harrisonburg, Virginia, with their teenagers and their dog, who might make an appearance today. The book we're discussing tonight is Teri's first book. Not her first time at the rodeo as a writer, but her first time with a full-length book. And it is full of vivid, honest, and engaging storytelling. It asks questions of readers for us to consider about our power, our privilege, and our approach to the work of ending racism in our contexts. She encourages us to engage in addressing these issues and offers us multiple resources for doing that. The book, Necessary Risks, Challenges Privileged People Need to Face, is inspired by her work with college students and her experience volunteer teaching in a men's prison. Teri, I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us to talk about your book. And I want to start off saying that this book is kind of memoir, teaching tool, reflection tool, resource book, liberation theology. And I would like to know how your work with college students on a university campus and incarcerated persons in prison helped to inspire this work, the background of the book coming into being.
Yeah, thanks for the question, and thank you, Shan, for having me. This is a lot of fun to be able to meet virtually and discuss the book is just a great privilege for me. Most of my writing comes out of my personal experiences, and I was learning so much. I will say the past 10 years or more of my life, I served at Monmouth College for 10 years. And that was after 13 years of being in parish ministry. And so at a small liberal arts college in the middle of rural Illinois, that was the most diverse community I ever served. And that diversity presented me lots of opportunities to learn and grow as a person who had not grown up surrounded by diversity. And so I was just learning a lot, and I learn best when I write things out. And so I had just been exploring ideas and learnings through a number of essays that I'd been writing and publishing for the Christian Century, and I'd been blogging, and then it was really the my adventure in volunteering at the men's prison and that eventually got me to a point where I was like, I have enough here for a book. I think, I actually thought forever I would just I really love writing personal essays. And I thought that would be the scope of my publishing. But it was when I got into the men's prison, that was just a profound experience for me, life altering. And so I just started to mix the stories, relationships, all that I was learning between the men's prison and the work I was doing with, and the learning I was receiving from the students on my campus from marginalized communities was just it was just really feeding me, and I needed to write it out to get clear in my head and to really learn it, and so it just sort of all evolved into the book. The book itself was quite a journey to publishing. I submitted I was pitching like 3 different proposals it was more of a memoir at the beginning. And then one of the editors at Fortress finally gave me the idea of the through line of risk taking. And that's what finally just centered all the stories and helped me get a structure for the book that was finally able to be successful in getting published.
Mm-hmm. So the framing of the book around risk came from a reader. I mean, an editor looking at the work and saying, okay, here's what I see that is the bigger frame of this. Interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And publishing, as I know you'll know, Shan, is also about what's missing. You have to find sort of what's missing in the market. And this editor in particular was saying, I'm really interested in a book on risk taking or on risk. And we had a conversation about it. And I said, I think that would work because that really resonates with me, that theme. And so that's really what led to the restructuring of all the stories into this format of the 10 risks that I lay out in the different chapters.
That's great. I want to invite my colleague Karen Rohrer to jump in with us.
Hi, everybody. Teri, I'm thinking about this concept of risk and the way that it lands in similar ways for a pastoral identity and authorial identity, and the ways it lands in different ways. And one of the things that I love about the book is that you share about people that you encounter in ministry, but I imagine the relationship with them is shifted when you're wearing your author hat. So I'm wondering about how your pastoral identity interacted with your authorial identity and how you think of the book living out one or both roles at the same time.
Pastor identity, authorial. I'm trying to think about a good answer to that. It's interesting. Well, and there's just so much to consider about positions of power, I think, in these relationships, and the different hat. You have to be very aware of your role and what hat you're wearing at the time. There was an epiphany for me very early on that I write about in the book, in the risk learning chapter, where I realized that I had been sort of expecting my students of color to teach me about their experience, and I had a moment where I realized how wrong that was, and how that must have felt for the student I was in this relationship with. And this is a student I still keep in touch with. I consider her a friend now. She's gone on to graduate, but in the moment, I was her chaplain. She was a student, and I was saying, you can feel free to teach me, or correct me when I'm making missteps or mistakes. And and she just gave me a tired sort of look in that moment, and which I didn't understand. And then on further reflection and then further reading and further learning of my own, taking responsibility for my own learning, I came to realize that, what I was asking her for was sort of to teach the teacher, and how it's just so important to understand the role you embody in these moments, and your authority in the relationship. And sometimes I think we downplay that too much, and it creates tension that we don't realize we should realize is there. We perhaps only realize it after the conversation's over and you've made the mistake, but then you can learn from it and do better the next time. And so there's just lots of moments where I think you have to really understand who you are in the relationship, what position you hold, what authority you hold, what privilege you hold and power you hold, in order to really best navigate these spaces across lines of difference. And there's a real self-awareness that is necessary for us to engage authentically and responsibly in these conversations. That is tricky, but again, the more self-awareness, the more awareness you are of who you are, what authority you bring to the relationship, will help you navigate that space. Is that sort of help you? Is that an answer to the question, Karen?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate how you're kind of drawing out the thread of discernment here, right?
Yes.
Discerning the role, discerning the moment, being sensitive to what's happening. I noticed that the chapter titles are sort of like a mirror to Ecclesiastes.
Oh yeah.
You know, a time to fail, a time to succeed, a time to learn, a time to teach.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that that's kind of about discerning the moment too. What is the right role for me in the moment,
Yes.
given my role all the time, my role out in the world.
Right.
And how do you discern both of those things in real time?
Yeah.
Which I really appreciated, because you have a gentle kind of way of inviting people along with that.
Yeah. I mean, that's totally it. And giving yourself even permission in the moment to pause. And I'm a huge fan now of Resma Menakem, and he's written some great stuff about even sort of just practical things like giving yourself a moment to just take a breath and be like, who am I in this moment? How do I want to be in this moment? How do I, and we'll have different kind of conversations will trigger different emotional responses in us, and just to be aware and compassionate with ourselves in the moment, as well as with the other person. There's just a lot of deep listening involved in all this. Yeah.
Teri, we have a question, our first question from the audience. Thank you to Cynthia Jackson, who's asked, how does the awareness, the self-awareness you're talking about, include your white privilege?
So that comes with really, white privilege is something that is a lifelong process of really engaging and learning about, and it, and we grow in awareness of it as we do our own personal learning, take responsibility for our learning, and it's a real paying attention to not only how we are in spaces where not everybody is like us, not everybody has the same privilege as us, not everybody comes from the same culture as us. How are people reacting to you? What do you have to offer in the moment, and what should you hold back? It's real internal work, and I will say it's I'm actually writing my Lenten devotion now for the Outlook, and I've decided to focus my Lenten devotions on interior work, which I say is the more interior work we do, the better we are at our outward living. Mm-hmm. And that it really does take paying attention to all that we're holding within us, the power, the privilege, the fears, the anxieties, and really honestly assessing that and holding that up in the light of God and saying, what do I do with all of this? how do I live with all of this faithfully in relationships to others? How do I use all this to make the world a better place? And that's just a lot of interior work that's necessary so that we can then be present and be the people that I believe God calls us to be in these important moments and exchanges with other people. And they can be other people with white privilege who may, not agree with us, or it's really with any other person. To be aware of who you are and what you bring to this relationship or the conversation is just vitally important. And the more you can grow in that awareness, the better.
We have a follow-up question from Cynthia, and then we've got another question that we'll come to, but I wanted to get to Cynthia's quick follow-up, which is, how do you choose to communicate that awareness? So, it seems to me one way is in writing a book like this, where you are demonstrating kind of how that dawned on you, and then what it has brought you to in terms of your life and how you've changed your own behavior. So some of it's in actually writing about it.
Yeah.
But then there's the in the moment awareness that you're communicating. So I'm thinking, Teri, about your example when you first go into the men's prison and you're going in ready to lead them, teach them. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, maybe this is not my role here,
Yeah.
And then you find ways to communicate with them differently, realizing, maybe that would be good. Could you talk about that experience a little bit and how that maybe demonstrates maybe a verbal or nonverbal communication of an awareness of a shift?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I do think it's often very helpful. Well, as I've been speaking about the book, I always think it's very helpful to sort of name your social location and just name it up front and say, I am speaking to you as a white cisgender woman who's, come from a wealthy background. So that is who I am. And then you get into it. So I do think it's important if the moment calls for it to name where you're entering the conversation from. But then there are these negotiations that take place. When I first went into the prison, my fear and anxiety would just led me to just go in there. And I was like, I was ready to introduce myself. I gave them my full title and told them all about myself because I just expected them to not honor my authority or not. I just expected them to give me a hard time and be like, who is this woman coming in here expecting to teach us? She knows nothing about us. And as soon as they started responding to me with the utmost respect and kindness and generosity of spirit, I was like, oh my gosh, this is totally not what I expected. And so then there's just a renegotiation of who I am in that space with them. And it went much better after that.
I love the detail in that story. Really stuck out for me because you were in a wobbly chair, wobbly desk.
The desk.
And then one of the men brought his desk and said, here, you use mine, it's better.
Yeah.
And took yours away and gave you his. And you say after that something that was so interesting to me, which is, you accepted the gift, right? So you didn't say, oh, no, but you actually let him give that to you.
Yeah.
And then you said, and then I felt like I was kind of I was grounded, or I don't remember the exact words you used, but it's interesting because even the accepting of that gift and then saying, yeah, it really did make me feel better to have a better desk.
Yeah.
And you accepted the man's generosity.
Yeah.
Was really a great story to show that modulation.
Right.
Then things shifted.
Right. Totally.
And that was kind of a nonverbal in a way. I mean,
it was totally.
Yeah.
And it's a
Yeah.
settling into the space, like
Yeah.
be allowing yourself to be welcomed and
Yeah.
be hosted a little bit, which I imagine is not something that most people who are incarcerated get to experience, is like feeling like they can host someone.
Yes, yes, exactly. I mean, it was just the first class I taught in there just blew me away because it was completely not what I expected. And well, and there's also this, I really want to speak to this too. There's this, we can come into these spaces hard and just ready, you know, almost ready for a fight. Like we know I'm gonna have to defend who I am. I'm a professional woman, and I may not know their lives, but I have something to offer. And we come in just sort of hard and defensive and ready to go. And then this whole journey has changed how I'm trying to enter spaces, and who I am as a leader now is I'm trying to enter spaces more soft and vulnerable and heart-centered and more open. Bell Hooks talks about a radical openness to just whatever is there that is being presented to us. It's just so much better to do that. You can read a room so much better if you really just take a minute to breathe and just focus on being radically open to whatever is presented, and have compassion for yourself and for the person who you're engaging with. And that's a big learning for me. It's hard to do too, because Bell Hooks also talks about, we're in this dominator culture where we're just kind of coming in to see where we are on the pecking order. Are we going to be the authority here? Or are we going to be beaten up? Or what's it going to be like? And our culture totally feeds that sort of dominator culture. And if we can just kind of take a breath and stay soft and receive what is coming our way, and then respond with the empathy and the grace that I really want. That's the way I want to be with people.
And I found it interesting that your first chapter in the book is the chapter on fear. You got to get that out on the table.
Right.
Like some of what we're dealing with here is our own fear of the other, our fear of losing control, our fear of the future, of being uncertain, of not having, whatever. Yeah. And I was just thinking about, that in some way what you're talking about is a transformation of fear in every particular moment when something unexpected happens, or when you're with people who are different and you don't know how to read them. Like you can't take anything for granted. Right. Because and typically in those moments of fear, we like to get grabby, snatchy, and we like get official and authoritative in order to try to control situations. And I started thinking a lot about how that operates in our society.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, I was so struck by the systems that show up in your book around fear. So there's like the fear when you're examined on the floor of presbytery, and how scary that is. Yeah. But the systems set the table for it to be scary, right? People talked about it as hazing. There were other people who had authority, who could tell you were wrong or shame you in front of a group of people. And then when you talk about the process to be a volunteer at the prison and all the things you have to go through that are clearly designed to put you on edge in part. Yes. Either passively or on purpose, designed to put you on edge. Yeah. And I think what's so subversive about the book is what you're setting up is, our default is fear, perhaps because of these systems. So showing up with that love energy, with that heart-centeredness is actually a subversion of all of these messages that we're getting. Right. And I loved your voice as you described here's what it's like to become a volunteer in the prison, because it sort of claimed the power and the love-centeredness. And there was a little bit of a laugh in your voice in that section too. Like, this is absurd. They're trying to teach me something I don't want to do.
Yeah. I love that. That's a great articulation of something I didn't even realize, but I love that. That's just totally true. We have just systems designed to control and just to, that trigger these hard responses from us. And if we can resist that, I mean, it is risky. I mean, the whole thing is risky, because if you come in a more vulnerable, radically open, heart-centered space, that doesn't, you can get really wounded. But it can also transform that space. I just find it to be a really powerful position in transforming a conversation in a space that has much more benefit than if I were just to come in raring to go and ready for a fight.
Teri, I've got a couple of questions I want to pick up from the audience, and I see one from Charles Hudson, and I promise I'll come back to you, Charles Hudson, but I want to thread in Shani McElwain's question right now from the Q&A, which gets to the prison ministry questions. Can you share what initially drew you to prison ministry in the first place, and then how risky was that to go into the unknown? We've been talking about it some, but I thought, since the question's there, to give us a little more robust sense of that ministry.
Yeah, that's a great question from Shani. It's important to note that I had some experience in a prison. When I was in seminary, I volunteered for a pastoral counseling practicum in a women's prison. So I did 8 weeks I met with two women who were incarcerated at a women's prison in Louisville, where I really felt like I just sat and listened to them, and they taught me about the world. And so I think I was the one who benefited most from that pastoral counseling practicum. But it was it was an experience. I was in a phase in my life where I just wanted to grow. I've just been a person that's really been plagued by fear all my life and anxiety. And in that, my final years of seminary, I just really wanted to, I was really just sick of myself and my fear from holding me back. And I said, I'm going to volunteer for that pastoral counseling practicum, because that sounds like the scariest thing I could ever do. And so I volunteered, and I did it. And just the fact of just walking into a prison is just unnerving, with all especially if you're a little claustrophobic like me, with all the gates and all the officers and all the checks, and it's just scary. And so I had that experience in and then in Illinois, when I was serving as a chaplain, I lived in a small rural community where there was not many good restaurants. Everything that we wanted was in the neighboring community, which was 15 miles down the highway. And so I go down this highway where the men's prison was sitting there. And so I drive by it just a couple times a week. And it was always calling me. I mean, my faith has always, I sometimes don't understand people who find their faith so comfortable, because my faith just constantly, Jesus is always calling me to the scariest of places. And I just really felt called by that prison. I had, done all the studying of mass incarceration. And that's the thing, we can read all the books, but but if we, Brian Stevenson I'm a huge fan of his, and he's really talking about you have to get proximate to suffering, and whereas, I can read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, but there's this prison that holds 1,800 men that was built to hold 800 men, and they are my neighbors. And so what is my responsibility there? What can I do there? And so I avoided that sense of call for 6 years, because I had a lot of good reasons to there were a lot of good reasons to avoid the voice of God telling me that I should go there. And and again, it just I do believe we all have sort of patterns in our calls. My pattern is just it just keeps poking me until I get so sick of it that I say, all right, fine. I'll go, but only just once or something. I have to negotiate, like just a limited. And so, I just pick up the phone and cold call and talk to the chaplain. He immediately invites me for a tour of the prison, and I just start talking about it, and it just blooms because it was right. And turns out a bunch of my faculty friends at Monmouth College were also feeling a sense of like, I should be doing something there too. And so it just grew into this educational outreach program that I eventually ended up coordinating between the college and the prison. That was just, it was just a great experience for those of us who had the blessing to get to know the men who were in there.
Mm-hmm. So I want to thread back to an earlier question that sort of piggybacks from what Karen said. This was from about a while back. So Charles has been waiting a while for this, but he asked, does the pedagogical approach to audience from your vantage point as an author, so like how you see yourself teaching or offering something to the audience, your readers, differ from your pastoral pedagogy with congregants or your educator pedagogy with students? So is there, like, as an author, is it different to invite people into the space you're doing as an author writing a book versus like when you're on the ground doing pastoral pedagogy, pastoral, work, and as an educator doing that? And so do you see any differences, or is it similar across, every approach that you take, or are there ways that might look or feel different for you because the situation's different as an author on a page versus, in person and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think the structure of what within what you're working in is always different. I think as an author, I have a lot more freedom, a lot more distance from to just kind of put it out there and then hope it's useful. But then I get to, walk, have conversations like this where, I get to put what in the book, what I wrote about in the book, into practice, because I actually, it doesn't feel different. It's more about how it's an embodiment of the lessons I've learned from writing this book about who I seek to be in the world with others. And that is the same for me as a pastor of a church, as an educator or a chaplain, or if I'm in a prison with men. It's sort of being my honest, authentic self, and seeking to be aware of the moment and engaged in the moment, and vulnerable enough in the moment to allow others to lead, others to direct the agenda. So there's a lot more crossover than that I would say in all the different roles.
But
then-
you know, oh, I'm sorry, Teri.
No, that's it. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, and I'm sort of paraphrasing. There was a follow-up that Charles asked, but it has to do with, you know, or at least this is how I'm interpreting it. There's a way in which when you're an author, you're kind of authoritative in a sense because you're writing a book that other people are going to pick up and read.
Yeah.
And yet your book is also an invitation. So it's not like we were talking about before the audience came in, it's not like a finger wagging, you all need to do this. You're saying,
Right.
This is how I've done this. I've done this transformative work in my own life, but yet you have a responsibility to those you're writing to, and also those you're writing about. Like you talk about, you're using pseudonyms for people, but then you're also checking with them and giving them a chance to correct your writing.
Yeah.
So that you're not coming at it authoritative, like over them, like you're not telling a story. You know what I mean?
Right. Yes. Yeah. And that's very important to me. Important enough that I even made sure the publisher hired a sensitivity reader for my book. So, so a woman of color was paid to read the manuscript and to make, you know, because it's important that I have that it's a conversation, and it's not just me putting my thoughts out there. It's that it's a conversation, and that I am open to being wrong and getting better and learning from the mistakes that I've made and can put more out there. Yeah.
What did you learn from her? I'm sorry, Karen.
No.
I was curious.
Yeah, well, it was more just like, it was like writing moments. She was great, and you know, and what I asked her for was not so much sort of writing edits, but I wanted her to read it as a woman of color and say, what have I written here that, what makes you feel uncomfortable? Can you name those things, those spots for me? And so there were some spots where there's some moments where I needed to add some more person-centered language, like maybe I had just referred to someone by their race, and I needed to add some, you know, we're not just our race. And so I needed to add some language about more person-centered language. I referenced sort of the Chicago, the South Side, and it was like, well, that's a little stereotypical. There's a lot of different people in Chicago South Side, so I tweaked that language. So it's just really important that that we're open to receiving feedback and being corrected. Yeah.
Karen, were you going to jump in? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious about, like, you're talking about the coherence between the roles of being an author and being a pastor and an educator, and that makes a lot of sense. And that makes me curious about the courage that it takes to record something that you can't then change.
Yeah.
Like I'm a preacher, like I'm a pastor first and foremost, and I love preaching because it's a speech act. Like I do it and then it's done, and nobody comes back and is like, actually on page 4, you know. But like, it takes a different kind of courage to be that kind of authenticity that you bring to a classroom or a pulpit.
Yes.
in a record that stays there, like a Karen that marks your journey.
Right.
I'm wondering if you could just talk about what that feels like.
Yeah, well, you know, it was interesting. So I just the book, I went, you know, I had to make so many decisions, you know, because when you put things down in Word and you publish them, you have to make decisions. I had to make decisions about names and whether to keep names, and it's really nice. You have a big section at the beginning, like where you can name the decisions you've made. One of the decisions I made after doing a lot of research and thinking about it was to capitalize white when in reference to race. And there's a really big debate out there right now about really good arguments on both sides as to whether, majority of people are capitalizing Black when it refers to race, but there's just disagreement and debate about whether we should be capitalizing white. And I came down and I wanted to capitalize white because I think I think white people need to learn more about the white culture that we that is expected. Other people of other races are expected to sort of live into our white culture, and yet we're completely aware that we have cultural habits and expectations and values. And so it's just that was really important to me. And so and that when you capitalize white, there's often discomfort by predominantly white people who are uncomfortable because they equate it with white supremacists or white nationalists, and I don't want to avoid that discomfort. I think we need to lean into that and be like, why is that discomfort there? And so it was more of like a conversation that I believed more white people need to be engaged in. And so I wrote that up at the beginning, and I said, but this is an evolving conversation. And I said, I might change my mind, And so I wrote that up at the beginning, and I think, it is set in a book, but I also believe that if I'm living right, and if I'm living this book right, I will be a different person in a year and have different thoughts and different ideas that, hopefully if I can write another book, it's going to contain that different. And so, I would hope there is a measure of grace that, the you that's going to write a book, in 2020 is going to be a different you that's going to write a book in 2022. But yeah, it's out there.
Teri, I want to go back to a question that was asked a little while ago from Diana Roth. Diana says, I would be interested in going to the basic ground level and would like to understand how we recognize the depth of our privilege and how our privilege unconsciously contradicts our desire to live a life of being racially just and non-biased. How does our privilege make it impossible to understand this difficult issue? So it sounds like a blinding, a way in which it's blinding to us.
Yeah. Well, I agree with that. One of the authors I read and I use in the book is Claudia Rankine, and I think she teaches at Yale. She's written beautiful books. My favorite is called Just Us, and I use what I call her definition. It's kind of a paraphrasing of, but the way she talks about privilege is when we're not affected personally by an issue. And so like mass incarceration did not affect me personally as an issue. And until I went to the prison, and now I have friends who are incarcerated. And so now there are people that I care about that are incarcerated. And so now that piece of my privilege is broken down. And so it's really important. I think that idea of the separation from how our privilege literally like puts up walls and borders of separation between us and people who are really suffering things. And if it's not affecting us personally, that's our privilege that protects us. And so again, I think it's just a kind of a good measure to be like, I don't know anybody in my life or in any of my circles who are incarcerated. I don't know anybody in my life or in my circles who are homeless. Doesn't affect me personally. So can I take steps to get personally proximate to that suffering, to those people, to sort of break that separation down? I think it's Gloria Anzaldúa too that talks about how our white dominant culture sort of seeks to keep us separate so that we are unaware and are kept ignorant, because then that feeds the system. That keeps those systems from getting disrupted. So it's really important that we're aware of what we're not aware of.
We have a question here, another question from Cynthia, who asks, how are you defining race? And says, I believe it was created by the Virginia legislature many years ago after a rebellion. So just interested in your definition of race. And then we've got another question from another audience member in a minute. Okay.
I don't know that I defined race in the book. I just think I do believe it's a social construct, and I get a little bit into the history of the social construct of race. But it's a social construct that has great implications of our position in society. So, I see myself as a white person, and and there's people of color, and it's a part of our identity, whether it's socially constructed or not.
It functions.
Functions.
It's functional, and not in a good sense, but functional. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So we have a question from Jane Holtzclaw. How did you change your approach after sensing from your student that she didn't want to be in a teacher role to you? How do we know what we don't know when we are looking through the lens of privilege? So, how do you figure this out, in the moment, and then make a shift?
Yeah. It's you gotta pay attention and know that you will make a mistake in the moment, and then you'll be in the moment again. And then how will you act? It's just really important that we learn from the mistakes we make, and the more reflection and more interior work we do, the better we'll be in the next moment. But we do really, but I could feel it in that moment. Mm-hmm. It wasn't going right. Mm-hmm. And yet I didn't have the knowledge then that I do now. And I won't make that mistake again. Mm-hmm. So, but you can feel when something's not right. Mm-hmm. And you can keep, and when you get that feeling, you can keep plowing ahead. Or you can just back off. And I think I did in that moment. I was like, something's not right here. And I stopped talking, and I often have, I don't know if this is just me, but I have, because I just think about things a lot. And I do think maybe I've gone back to that student because I'm still in a relationship with her. And I'll be like, hey, remember that time 20 years ago when I was riding with you on a bus? And I said this. I just want to tell you that I wouldn't do that again, or I understand more. You know, there's nothing stopping us from revisiting or going back to say, I really learned a lot since that moment, and I'm sorry I spoke like that. Yeah, and I'm really trying to do better now. So I think that can be really authentic.
So just keep at it and take your experience and ask yourself questions, ask the other person questions if it's possible.
Yeah.
And then try it differently the next time the situation is. So it's just an iterative process, essentially.
It is. Yeah. Yeah.
We're getting close to the end of time. And Teri, one thing I wanted to ask you before we say goodnight, that I was curious about reading the book is, what do you see as the underlying theology that you're working out of? Like, is there a particular biblical passage that always informs you, or a particular theological idea that you feel like you take with you through all of this? Because there's some different possibilities in the book that I see. And it's not that you have to pick one. Okay. So you can say, well, all of them. But I was just curious if there's some central theological or biblical idea that you feel like is sort of a wellspring for you as you do this kind of work. Yeah.
I've been thinking, and as I preach and speak and on the book, it's for me, it's a grounding in agape, the radical love that the Gospels call us to. That's so much more than what we're going to cross stitch on a pillow or read a passage at a wedding. It's a value, an ethic that we live by, where there is respect and dignity for all persons, and again, a grounding in openness, receptivity, learning, and grace for mistakes that we make, so that we can continue in the work. The work is so important. It is so liberative for people of privilege, as well as just working for a more just world. It is, to go about this work, which is work of love, is the most freeing project. That's just such a bad word for it, but it's the most freeing, liberative work that I've been involved in my whole life, and the most important. And I think it's just grounded in love, and how we are with each other, and how we care for ourselves as God's beloved children, in that God has dreams for who we are to become too, and the freedom that God wants for us. Because I talk about how dehumanizing the systems of injustice are, not only for those who are oppressed by it, but by those who are benefiting from it. And we need this, the people of privilege need this freedom for ourselves too. And so it's the best way to love ourselves as well. So I think that would be my grounding theology.
Yeah, thank you. Karen, do you have any last question or anything you'd like to say before we wrap up?
No, I'm just so glad that you asked that question, Shan, because that was one of mine too. We had talked a little bit about that before. So thank you for answering it, Teri, and leaving us with a word.
Yeah, that's a great one. And I want to say thanks to Karen for sharing this conversation with me and with Teri. And Teri, thank you so much for taking some time and for writing the book. it really, I do really appreciate this agape, and I thought of it very much in the book, in the chapter where you're talking about bell hooks and the love ethic, and that love ethic is for us to turn toward ourselves as well toward others.
Yeah.
And so it's a mutual movement. And so thank you so much for doing that and for providing this book that's a great resource. For those of y'all who are here in the audience, if you haven't had a chance to look at Teri's book, I encourage you to, because it's a great way for you to work through some things and think through some things, ask yourself some questions, look at resources that Teri's kind of broken ground on, books and questions and activities. And you know, it's a great way to get started on the work or to kind of fuel your work if you were feeling a little like, I don't know what to do next in the society that we live in. I know we've missed a couple of audience questions and comments, and I apologize for that, but Teri, I wanted to give you as much of the floor as possible. So thank you again to Teri. Thank you to all of our support people, Tisha Wu from the library, Bobby, who's still with us. And for those who are interested, we'll be doing another book talk in February. In the meantime, read Teri's book and get in touch with her at Presbyterian Outlook if you have questions or want to know more from her about the work she's doing now. Everybody have a great Advent time of reflection and a beautiful Christmas. And thanks a lot. See y'all later.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Thanks again, Teri.
Thank you. Thank you.